I'm Nadine Keller, and this is the What the Speak podcast.
What the Speak, episode 57. Blow, how you like me now?
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
Struggling with feeling comfortable in front of an audience when you present? Or maybe you're confident, but you have difficulty stumbling over filler words like and ah. Well, you can start kicking ass today by signing up for our weekly VIP updates. As a bonus, you'll also receive 11 free tips that will uncover 6 psychological secrets to public speaking, plus 5 tips on how to stop using filler words. Go to whatthespeak.com/VIP. Nadine Keller, are you ready to answer the question, what the speak?
You bet I am, Brian.
All right. So, Nadine, you are a speaker. You're also the author of a fantastic book called Make It All About Them, Winning Sales Presentations. Plus, you're the president of Precision Sales Coaching and Training. And this is really cool. We've had several audience members request you as a guest, so I definitely had to get you on the show. So thanks so much for being here today.
That's very exciting. Thank you for having me, Brian.
So let's just jump right in, Nadine. I would love for you really quick to tell us when you're out speaking, and I know you do a lot of training, you do a lot of speaking, what are typically the topics that you're asked when people invite you to come to an event or to their office or whatever it is? You know, what are some of those key topics that you're usually presenting on?
Well, my passion is really helping people increase their sales effectiveness. So obviously that's very broad. I have been focused, though, very much in the last couple of years at the end of the sales cycle, the sales presentation. And the reason for that is after, 20, I'm afraid to say 25 years, I think it is 25 plus maybe, even years in the industry, I have had an opportunity to see so many presentations. And I think the bar is so incredibly low. And as a result, people have been very successful in spite of their presentation skills. But in today's world that's so commoditized, I think the presentation itself becomes an opportunity to differentiate. Everybody's looking to differentiate.
For sure. Well, and I know, from my personal experience, my background, I've used presentation opportunities as a chance to really stand out from the crowd and make an impression that gets people's heads spinning. They're like, wow, we just had a lineup of meetings from potential vendors or whatever, and holy cow, like, I don't remember anybody else's presentation, but this guy's presentation, holy cow, we like what's going on here. And it's like you said, the bar is so low. And for those of us that are in that situation, whether we're actually sales professionals, or if we're an entrepreneur that's trying to, maybe you're trying to get a partner or an investor or, raise capital, whatever it is, the presentation is an opportunity for you to really stand head and shoulders above the rest. And so we're going to dive into some of those things today with Nadine.
Good.
All right. So Nadine, let's specifically talk about your origin story. How the heck did you get into this whole world of speaking and mastering communication skills, specifically in the sales environment? And as you described, kind of the latter portion of the sales cycle. We'd love to hear from you. Where did this all begin?
Well, very early in my career, I actually started at Chase Manhattan Bank, and I was lucky enough to have joined a department that was reporting directly to the vice chairman of the global bank at the time. And he was busy trying to turn the commercial bankers of the day into investment bankers, which required a whole different skill set. And being very green, I had an opportunity to rub shoulders with who I think think are the best people in the industry in terms of understanding how training can have an impact on strategy and be really used to implement strategy. And one of the areas of expertise, there was the corporate finance and there was risk management, and then there was the sales piece. And in those days, sales in banking was really a 4-letter word. I mean, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a banker, was the mantra of the day. However, I became fascinated with the idea of selling and in communication and how that played out in the banking environment. And I was very fortunate to have a incredible, phenomenal boss at the time who had given me quite a bit of latitude to do some research, both inside the industry and outside the industry, to understand best practices around selling. So I really made a study of sales and tried to bring that to the organization. And as I went up in this particular department in the organization, I became responsible for the sales and marketing training and development. And then an odd thing happened. There was the merger of Chase and Chemical, and they needed someone responsible for merger communications. And even though I knew nothing about it, I guess I was in the right place at the right time and became responsible for the merger communications and got to know Bill Harrison, who at that time was the vice chairman of Chase. It was right before he became chairman. And he was looking for a communications person. And I got tapped on the shoulder to do that and was really responsible for his employee communications, the investor communications, and client communications. And I always joke about, as I look back at it right now, I was an accessory to the crime of the day, which was murder by PowerPoint. And this man, who was as charming as could be, he was Southern, tall, charming man. We would load up with all of those things that we tell people not to do today, those slides that we're all so familiar with, and just take that personality right out of him. But he was successful in spite of it, obviously. So
excellent. So how did you transition from that world and a lot of those experiences of, like you said, you really using slides in a way that isn't so effective today, to the place where you are now? And we'll get into some of the particulars of your expertise. But what was the turning point for you that you kind of had this aha moment that presentations and how you communicate what it is that you offer is something so much more than just a list of things that you run through?
Yeah, I think the aha moments, I would say, came with my work of the last, let's say, 8 years in particular, where I have been brought in at the end of the sales cycle of a very long sales cycle. So complex sale, for example, in the retirement industry where there's a 401k, people have been working on it since the RFP came in. And then I was asked to come in to help prepare the team. And what I found is there was so much focus on the content, what we were going to say, and not how we were going to say it or the actual experience. And I always say that, I mean, if it was about the data and the content, we could do this all by email.
Yeah.
But it's really about providing an opportunity for the client, or same thing in any kind of presentation, for the audience to experience who you are. And so little attention was given to that. And I also saw that there were so many what I would call myths or traditions that have been handed on from generation to generation. People doing something because that's the way they saw their boss do it.
Yep.
And when I ask these people the question, why are we doing this? And they take a step back, it's usually with a laugh and say, you know what, that really does not make much sense. So there are a series of things that I'm just fascinated in terms of how they have lived all of these years, and they're really doing no one any favors.
Got it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your personal development in this area. What are some of the things that you struggled with? as you began, to participate in, either shaping these communications, these presentations, or even, maybe even delivering them yourself? What's something that you can share that early on when you first were focused on this area that you had difficulty with?
Well, I think connected to what I just said, that the realizing that it's not about, or it's not only about the content. And I think having the confidence to know that I'm the expert in the room. And that's something that I'm coaching people with all the time. They're so worried that they're going to mess up when in fact they have an expertise way farther and deeper along than the audience does, so that they do have value. So I think the thing that I struggled with is that I'm better than I thought I was, and having that confidence. And of course, the more you do it, the more confident you are. And obviously, the better prepared you are, the more confident you are going to be. But that's something that I always try and get the people that I coach to focus on, is that they know their stuff. And it's usually not so much about the stuff, but it's how you connect with people.
Yep. Perfect. All right. So Nadine, let's dive into some of the material that's in your book. There's some really great takeaways from what you pulled together in that material, and would love to get your direct perspective on it. So first thing I want to talk about, and you mentioned this just a few moments ago, is that it's really comes down to rapport and how, the prospect or your audience perceives you. Do they see you as somebody that they feel like you're one of them? Do they see you as somebody that they like and trust because they feel like, I know this person, I get a sense that they understand us. And because of that, that opens up a tremendous amount of doors. And I usually teach people myself that it doesn't matter what you're selling. The first decision is not to buy what you're selling, it's to buy you.
Absolutely.
And if they don't buy you, it doesn't matter how great or amazing or fantastic it is that you're offering, they're not going to make that decision to commit to your solution or your service or your product, whatever it is. So can you talk a little bit, and I know this is kind of a loaded question. Why are sales presentations usually so boring?
Oh my God. Because they're all about us and not the client, right? As human beings, we want it to be all about me. So as salespeople, when we go in, and sometimes we're set up because a client will issue an agenda, for example, that makes us think that they want the presentation to be all about us because they ask us to tell us about, the products and our pricing and our organization and our culture or whatever it may be. But the reality is they want the presentation to be about them. And specifically, what are you going to do to help them solve their problems and take advantage of their opportunities? Yep. So that's the first thing. We use the analogy all the time of a photo album. If you were at a party last week, Brian, and you run into someone, and I'm saying photo album, how I'm dating myself, and they pull out their iPad and they have pictures on it from the party, and they say, Brian, come look at these pictures. If you're like most people, you'll go through those pictures pretty quickly, the ones that don't have you in them, and you will pause at the ones that do have you in it. Same thing with the sales presentation. We want it to be about us, or any presentation for that matter. So I think that's one thing, somebody droning on and on and on about them, right? Without you in it.
Let me interject really quick and just kind of restate this. So oftentimes we go into situations thinking that the prospect is, or the audience, if we're not even talking in the sales environment, but just a general presentation, that they want to know what we offer, which is true. But the twist is that it's not so much about what we offer, but what is significant about what we offer that will help them address a problem that they have.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's hard to kind of grasp that because they're almost the same thing, but there's just a little bit of a difference between those two things. And if you can understand that minute difference, it changes the whole ball game for you.
Yes. And one way to do that is, I'd say 9 times out of 10, before we work with an organization and we go in and we look at their standard presentation, the first 3 or 4 pages are all about them, right? How big they are, how great they are, the awards that they've won, their ratings, whatever it may be. So what we do is we suggest that every presentation starts out with our understanding of that client's needs and situation.
Yep.
And what that does is that sends the message very strongly to the client that this conversation is going to be foremost about you, and then how we will help you solve your problems.
So good. All right. Well, did you have like one or two other things related to what makes a typical sales presentation boring?
Boring. Certainly the slides, sometimes the decks that are more easily measured in pounds than in ounces. But I also think that what we talked about a little bit earlier, that connection, that people-to-people connection, I referred earlier to a tradition that's been passed down. And one tradition, or an example of that, would be the way that we introduce ourselves. Typically in a sales presentation, someone will say, my name is, which is a good thing. And then it's automatically followed by their title, which basically means nothing to anyone. So I am the, relationship manager for the Northeast Division or whatever it may be, right? And then for whatever reason, we feel that it's necessary to talk about the years that we've been someplace. I've been in the organization for X years or the industry for X years. Usually does not matter at all to the client. So we encourage people to, yes, say your name, but instead of talk about your title, state your title, talk about what you do for them. Yeah. So I'm the person who's going to be responsible for ensuring that all of your needs are understood by our organization and that everything is delivered in a way that meets your servicing preferences, for example. And then finally, rather than years, what can you say to highlight or to show a little bit about who you are as a person? And that can be as simple as saying, one of the things that I love about what I do is X. Or it could be, I am so excited to be in Chicago today because it's Old Home Week for me. I went to University of Chicago. Yep. Something that shows some bit of who you are as a person. Because again, as we talked about, people buy from people who they like. And we have to give them the opportunity to like us. So often these environments that we walk into are so sterile and we leave our personality at the door. So I encourage people to bring that personality to the table.
Love it. All right. So we talked about rapport and people may be scratching their head saying, okay, that makes sense, but how do I establish rapport in those situations? And I'm a huge advocate for really understanding the significance of the language that we use to communicate, and through that communication, allowing us to build that relationship and establish rapport very quickly with our audience. And one of the things I know that you talk about and advocate is this understanding that you should use plain English versus jargon.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Particularly, we do a lot of work in financial services, but I think it goes across all industries, is that we have created our own language. And this language, it can be very foreign to our audience. And we know from research that the more jargon a person uses, the less trustworthy that they are. And we also know that our audience, being human beings, their listening goes in and out anyway. If they have to stop because they have to figure out what a word means, a word that's not common to them, we're losing the opportunity to connect with them.
Yeah.
So I think jargon can be deadly. And so what I suggest that people do is really look. Sometimes I'll use my teenage boys to go through something with and say, who are not in the particular industry that I'm working with at the time, is there anything here that you don't understand? Because often it's hard for us to even recognize our own jargon. Right. It's so embedded. I also have a concept about what I call 3 o'clock in the morning language. And I don't know if you were like I am, Brian, but every once in a while I wake up, my bewitching hour is at 3, right? And I start thinking about my work and whatever, the things that I'm worried about. And I always challenge people to try and tune in to the 3 o'clock in the morning conversation that their client is having. And it's usually not jargon oriented. It's usually plain old English. And by the way, that's where the emotion also lives. And if we can connect on an emotional level with our clients, we're ahead of the game. So jargon is a killer. And I always encourage people to get conscious about using it.
Definitely. Well, the other thing I would add to that is that you want to be able to establish credibility. Using words that are specific to an industry can be key.
Yes.
As long as you're using them at the right place and at the right time. But if all you're talking about is, these acronyms or, highly technical terms over and over and over, and let's face it, in a lot of these complex selling environments, there's multiple people representing different departments and disciplines that may not have a clue what you're talking about. So it's important for maybe 1 or 2 people in the room to know, okay, this person understands kind of what we need from if it's a technical standpoint or what have you. But then there's others in the room that say, okay, well, it seems like they know what they're talking about, but now I'm also able to understand and engage with the other things that they're saying because they're not talking with those terms and in that jargon context.
Absolutely. And, the problem is when you talk about credibility, I think that junior people, when they're new to an industry, new to an organization, as you said, one of the ways that they establish credibility is by using the jargon. It's kind of the secret language. But when we're thinking about, outside of our organization, and as you said, sometimes there are multiple people on the buying committee or in, who we are presenting to, who really have never heard, or they're not very technical people. And so we've got to be able to connect with them as well, and not just those that are immersed in the same industry.
For sure. All right, Nadine, we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back to finalize our discussion with the rapid fire Q&A.
Great.
I want to thank you so much for either listening to or watching today's episode. If you love What the Speak, please do me a big favor and help spread the word. Go to whatthespeak.com/love. Again, it means the world to have your support and your enthusiasm, so thank you. So Nadine, let's jump right into the last 5 or 6 questions that we've got for you really quick. Kind of the first thing that comes to the top of your mind, and then we'll move on to the next one. So first, we touched upon this topic a little bit, but would love to hear from you. Are you a slide or no slide kind of gal?
Oh, it depends. It depends. So no slides always if they're not designed well and supportive of the speaker. Yeah. Slides can be so powerful in terms of emphasizing a point, connecting on an emotional level with people, but they can be deadly if they're designed wrong. And there's a time and place for them. In an intimate meeting, I would not want to use slides.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so as a speaker and a presenter, is there one, if you had to pick one, somebody out there that you look to, that you respect and that you admire? And if so, why is that?
Had to pick one is the tough one here. And I'm afraid I'm a product of the last presentation, the last fabulous presentation I had witnessed.
Yep.
And Tony Robbins comes to mind. The man has got such incredible presence. Right. And I mean, certainly his stature probably helps with that. But he is someone who is really focused on the audience, which is so critically important. He's a terrific storyteller, and I admire him very much.
Awesome. So this will be an interesting question, because I know you typically have found yourself in corporate environments where you're presenting. You work with a lot of your clients in those same environments. What's the craziest, silliest, most bizarre, like anything that's out of the ordinary when you were giving a presentation that may have happened?
That when I have been giving a presentation, a lot of things have happened. I've had fire drills in the middle of a presentation. Yep. But I think probably the weirdest one was I was in a very large room that was almost like a loft-like environment. Yeah. And there were birds that were trapped in the room. And the conference director tried to do anything that he could to get rid of the birds, and that just was not going to happen. So I had to live, and the audience did as well, with these birds, tweeting, which was fine. But every once in a while, they would do a little dive down, particularly when breakfast was served. And at one point, I was in front of the room, and I had a manual that I was referring my audience to. Right. And just as I had it positioned in front of me, there was a big plop.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
I ask this question of every guest, and I usually get some good stories. And Nadine, I feel pretty comfortable that that's definitely a top 5, maybe even a top 3 story. I had a feeling where it was going, but yes. Yeah, that's definitely interesting.
Well, had it been on the head, right? It might have made number one.
That would be a shoo-in for the best story. All right, so this is an interesting question, and it typically is usually obvious, but I'd love to dig into it with each guest. How big of an impact has your ability to communicate had on your career? And obviously you teach others, but we'd love to hear from you. How has this made a difference for you, mastering communication skills, or at least committing to mastering communication?
It has made, everything. Those early days at Chase, had I not understood the importance of communication, I don't think I would have had as many opportunities as I had. I'm so thrilled. I have 2 boys that I mentioned earlier. I'm so thrilled that their education from the beginning incorporated presentation skills, which in my day, it really was not the case. And often when I warm up a group, I'll ask them about, their memory of their first presentation. Many of them are talking, college or business is the first time that they've ever been in front of an audience. So I'm so glad that the educational environment, academia, is embracing it, as well as people like yourself who are elevating the consciousness around the importance of it.
Awesome. All right, Nadine, knowing what you know now and all the experience that you've had over the years, for somebody who's just getting started, maybe it's that person that they're giving their presentation for the first time in the early part of their career, what wisdom would you share with them of like one major thing that they should focus on while they're developing these skills?
I would say, I'm going to echo what I said earlier, that you're better than you think you are. But also my overriding message is around connecting with the audience. And people who are starting out, it can be a terrifying, we've all heard all the statistics about a fear, death is second biggest fear at a presentation. If you can connect with people, we do that every single day in every conversation that we have. So one of the first things that I do when I work with someone is to help them find that connection. These are human beings that you're talking to, not a mass, not to think of them as a mass, and to genuinely approach it in terms of the value that you can bring to them, that this is really about them and not you.
All right. Well, Nadine, we're going to have links to your website, your book, any other resource that I think we can share with the audience. On a closing note, your book is fantastic. I'm curious to find out, is there another book that you love on this topic of presenting or speaking or connecting with an audience that you might recommend?
There are several, but I think that Gar Reynolds' Presentation Zen is important for everybody to take a look at.
Yep.
It does focus quite a bit on the support materials that you use, but I think it can be very helpful in terms of helping people to focus on their message.
Got it. Well, Nadine, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story and obviously all the amazing insights that you've been able to pull together. You truly are somebody that kicks ass when they speak, present, or pitch.
Thank you very much, Brian. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you.
If you liked what today's guest had to share in our discussion, you may want to grab an audio copy of their latest book for free by going to WTSaudiobook.com. That's WTSaudiobook.com.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whattospeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.